Well, hello, friends. Hello, fellow podcasters, and of course, the podcast adjacent. I'm Tom Webster from Sounds Profitable here at our corporate headquarters at One Sounds Profitable Tower. And I wanted to walk you through a little slice of research that I pulled for you this week. This is from our recent The Podcast Landscape 2024 update, and it's a revisit of a segment that we looked at last year called the Persuadables. And given that a year has passed and podcasting has grown a little bit, I think more on the video side, I thought it was worth taking another look at the persuadables with this year's data to see if they're still persuadable. And if so, how can we reach them? So I want to take you through just a little bit of my take on this data. This won't take long, honestly. But again, this is from the podcast landscape. And absolutely want to thank Wondery, BetterHelp, NPR, ESPN Podcasts, Libsyn, American Public Media, Paramount, and the Sirius XM Podcast Network, and of course, our research partners at Signal Hill for making this available to you. This is going to help you, and it's them supporting our work and helping to pay my salary to bring this all to you that makes all of this possible. So thank you very much to those wonderful companies. So the first thing that we have to really look at here, and I'll just put up the methodology, is that this is the largest publicly available study of podcasting today. It's over 5,000 people. We're putting it all out there. It's weighted to the U.S. population 18 plus, and that enables us to take some really interesting looks at various slices of this data. And you're going to be seeing a lot from that, a lot of that from us over the next few months. But what we want to look at today are the percentage of humans 18 plus in America that have never listened to a podcast. And today that's 26%. Last year that was 28%. So we've converted some, right? So that's I think the good news. We have converted some people from never listened to a podcast to at least trying one. Now, when we ask people, why haven't you consumed a podcast? The top reasons are my existing options give me what I need. That's inertia, right? That's the inertia of what you're already doing. I prefer watching video over listening. And that is something that I think we can address with the rise of video podcasting, with so many of the newest hits in podcasting actually being video podcasts. This is a perception issue, and I think that's something that we can change. One thing I want to point out here, I can't find a podcast that seems interesting, was the only number that changed a ton in this particular graph. It was 18% last year. This year, it's 13%. So that went down as a reason. But what went up as a reason is my existing options give me what I need. And that actually went up a lot given the rest of this data. So that inertia factor is something that's very strong. And inertia is basically the thing that keeps people from changing, even if they're not satisfied with what they're doing. Maybe they're not dissatisfied enough to the point of actually making a change. But I think there's some data in here that suggests there's some levers that we can pull here. So that 26% who never listened to a podcast, we can actually segment them out into three different slices. And we did this last year. The first slice we call the unreachables, and that's 11% of those non-listeners, right? 11% of that 26%, not 11% of America. And we call them the unreachables because for various reasons, largely economic, they are in fact not necessarily reachable, at least regularly, by podcasting. And I've highlighted some of the top reasons by this slice for not listening to a podcast. And they include things like, I don't have a device to play podcasts. And by the way, that could actually be true for a large percentage of these people. My home internet is not good enough. I don't know how to listen to podcasts. They cost money. I don't have enough mobile data. I don't have home internet. I don't have mobile data at all. So that's going to be a pretty tough nut to crack, I think. There are some economic reasons why this particular segment may not listen to podcasts. Another section of these, and this is certainly the majority, we call them the resistors. And they don't listen to podcasts, and they may have heard of podcasts and have a perception of podcasts. And the reasons why they don't, certainly inertia is a huge one here. My existing entertainment options give me what I need. But bigger ones here also, I prefer watching video over listening. Now, again, I think that's addressable, but a lot of that is TikTok. A lot of that is streaming video, free ad-supported streaming, and some premium streaming video as well. I prefer reading over listening. That's certainly a thing. I don't like spoken audio. I don't understand the benefits of podcasts. Now, I'm not saying that these people are unreachable. They're just sort of not low-hanging fruit, right? They're going to be a little harder to reach. But again, with video podcasting, that's a thing I think we can do. And that leaves us with 30% of non listeners, the persuadables. That 30% of non listeners, by the way, is 8% of the US population, 18 plus in total, or about 20 million humans. So the persuadables is a segment of about 20 million Americans who could be the next tier of people that we could bring to podcasting. Again, that 30% of non listeners, 8% of Americans, 18 plus overall. I think that we could bring them into the fold. And podcasting has changed enough where I think the reasons and the ways that we could bring those persuadable humans into the fold, I think, have gotten stronger and more compelling for a lot of reasons. I do want to point out here this is what the persuadables look like, and this segmentation of non listeners look like this year. Last year, there were some more persuadables, right? The persuadables were 34% of non listeners. And what does that mean? That means we've converted some. And as you convert some, that makes the percentage of unreachables and the percentage of resistors go up in proportion, right? So it's not like things are getting worse. I think this is a sign that we have actually managed to convert some of these persuadables. So, as I mentioned last year when we looked at this, the persuadables do tend to run a little bit older than the US population, certainly older than podcast listeners in general. 48% of the persuadables are 55 plus. That's actually gone down a little bit, so we have converted a few. And they are certainly overwhelmingly female. 62% of the persuadables segment are female, 38% male. So just as we observed last year, this segment really holds true to be older women. I mentioned in the initial webinar for the podcast landscape that that this segment of non-listeners in general tends to lean more white. They over-index white, but that really is a trailing variable of age because white Americans tend to be older. In fact, they're about 10 years older than the Hispanic Latino population mean, and almost 10 years older than the Black American population. So I think white is a trailing variable here, but certainly older and female are the hallmark, I think, of the persuadables demographic of non-listeners. Now, why don't they consume a podcast? Well, we've taken out the people who say, well, I can't get one because I don't have enough mobile data, or I just don't like listening to things. And what we're left with are things like not enough free time, which again, I think podcasts can actually address, because the ability to listen to a podcast wherever and whatever you're doing is a benefit that I think counters that. I don't know how to listen. Again, this is something I think that the growth of YouTube as a podcast client, and certainly a video podcasting, that's going to counter that a little bit, because I think more people know how to use YouTube than know how to listen to a podcast in a podcast client. I don't understand the benefits. I can't find an interesting one. And of course, they cost money. That's starting to go down a little bit as we're less reliant on the term subscribe. So the thing about the persuadables, though, is that they're not a static segment. Their demographics look similar to last year, but their media habits are changing too. Certainly, so many Americans have had their media habits change considerably over the last 5 years. A lot of that is online video. A lot of that is short form online video, Instagram, Reels, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, etc. So certainly, just like the typical American 18 plus, the persuadable segment are also seeing their tastes trending towards video. We asked them what types of media platforms that they have consumed in the last month. Number one here by a lot is AM/FM radio. They're big radio listeners. Free streaming music, the free versions of things like Pandora and Spotify. Streaming AM/FM radio. So again, more AM/FM content delivered in a different way. Owned music, and that's your CDs, your vinyl, your 8 tracks, whatever you're rocking. Premium streaming music, things like the paid versions of Spotify, Pandora, Apple Music, etc., satellite radio, and of course, audiobooks. That's what they're consuming every month. And this is what they're paying attention to as far as social media goes. And certainly there's a number that should stand out pretty heavily on this graph, and that is Facebook. 79% of these persuadables are using Facebook every month. And that is certainly in line with all of the data that I've either seen or collected on Facebook usage, which does trend towards older Americans, and it does trend female. So Facebook, by far the number one platform here. Instagram is a distant second, followed by Snapchat. And you can see Twitter, Reddit, Telegram, and Discord to varying degrees, all significantly smaller than Facebook. That's a snapshot. But when you ask these persuadables, what media are you using more lately? What media are you using less lately? You get a pretty interesting story here. So, where are they spending more time? They're spending a lot more time with TikTok and YouTube. Just as I mentioned, their media habits are changing. They are going more towards video, potentially short form video, but certainly video, with a large figure here for more time with TikTok, more time with YouTube, more time with free streaming TV with ads. Fast is certainly starting to eat the universe a little bit. More time on Facebook, and more time with free streaming music. And I think they're spending more time with Facebook because some of their other platforms are letting them down, and you can look at the number one answer here on the right for what are you spending less time with. And that, of course, is X, or Twitter, if that's what you still call it. Uh, Twitter and X are imploding essentially with the American public. We're seeing those numbers for turning away from it, using it less. Those numbers are quite high. But what else they're spending less time with? AM/FM streaming radio, AM/FM broadcast radio. Now, think about this. They're listening to less radio. They're listening to less broadcast radio. They're listening to less streaming radio. It's the same content. And they're using Twitter less, right? Those are all sources of information for a lot of people. They're how a lot of people in this country are informed. They're informed about current events, about politics, about the news, about opinions about the news. Those things they're spending less time with, and it's being replaced by TikTok, YouTube, and free streaming TV, right? It's a different type of information. It's probably not exactly replacing the actual, I won't say caliber because that's judgmental, but the type of information that they were getting from things like broadcast radio and Twitter. They're not necessarily getting that on TikTok, and they're not necessarily getting that in free streaming TV, right? What do they like to do while they're listening to spoken word audio? And of course, this is amongst people who do listen to spoken word audio of any kind. So not podcasts, but things like broadcast radio and audiobooks. These are all fairly similar to last year. They look to spoken word audio as a companion media, something to listen to, something to consume while they're doing other things: housework, cooking, exercising. Watching TV or video can also mean listening to things on YouTube without watching the actual video, right? Running errands. The one big difference here from last year is commuting or traveling at 27%. Last year, that was 19%. And I think that's really just a sign of more and more people returning to the workplace, or doing less hybrid work, and so on. Those are certainly societal shifts as well. So when you look at all of that together, even with that tilt towards video, and it's a marked lean towards consuming things in video, there are some signs that the persuadables can be persuaded, because I think their media mix has some holes. And I mentioned one a little bit earlier with a significant shift away from broadcast and streaming AM/FM radio, and away from X or Twitter, which for a lot of people was a real-time news source. Those sources may have been replaced by things like TikTok, but they're not replaced in the same way. One of the questions that we asked everybody last year, and we asked it this year as well: what are the perceived benefits of listening to podcasts? And here's what the Persuadables told us. And this was after defining a podcast to them, and many of them had heard of podcasting, right? So it wasn't a complete unknown. And then we gave them some benefits. Which ones really appealed to you? Not going to spend a lot of time on this. You can download this on our site. We'll put the Persuadables up online for you. But it's a lot of companion things, something to listen to in the car, listen to while walking or exercising, occupy me during mindless tasks or chores, to keep me company, and so on. I'm going to show you this year, and I want to highlight 4 things that changed significantly. These were the biggest changed perceptions, the biggest movers, if you will. Listen to discussions on topics of interest. That went up a lot. That went up 6 percentage points. Learn about new hobbies. I pointed this out in the main webinar for the podcast landscape. That went up 6 percentage points. Get business news and information. Get news or political analysis. In a sample where not a lot changed that significantly, those 4 things did. And I would submit that there's a void, that there's potentially a void in the lives of this segment of humanity that maybe they have, that they're missing from their previous sources of this kind of information, whether that's broadcast radio or Twitter, or maybe some other smaller sources. And it kind of sounds more appealing to them this year than it did last year. I think that's an opening, right? That's an opening, and a way through that opening might be through video. Last thing I'll point out here about the Persuadables, we also asked a few different types of podcast content. How likely, very or somewhat likely, would you be to listen to a podcast that contained this? And this is, again, amongst the Persuadables, people who have not yet listened to a podcast. The two most appealing things here at 25% each were a podcast about a favorite TV show or movie, and a podcast produced by a favorite TV show or movie, and then a podcast about a brand or product, and finally a podcast hosted by a celebrity. So a brand or product actually did better than just a celebrity podcast on its own. And I've talked about in the past, celebrity is not quite enough. That's last year. This year, all those numbers are substantially higher. A podcast about a favorite TV show or movie is 31 compared to 25, and a podcast produced by a favorite TV show is 30 compared to 25. You see a similar 5 percentage point increase, that's 20%, about a favorite brand or product. So there's more interest in these things. There's certainly more interest in companion content to video, because as we have seen, the Persuadables are watching more video. They're watching more short form video on TikTok, but they're also watching more free ad supported TV. So I'm going to get to some recommendations and findings. I want to remind you that we're going to be putting out a lot of data for you for free for months and months, and maybe the rest of my life eternally, that we're drawing from this significant data set. We're going to have a report on platforms, audio, and video. I'm going to be giving a talk on that at Advertising Week in a couple of weeks. Some enhanced studies by race and ethnicity and LGBTQ plus listeners. And we're going to start rolling out some genre-specific reports as well. If you're not subscribed to our newsletter, scan your phone thingy at that little QR thingy. And if you don't know what a QR code is, I'm not sure what it stands for, but I believe the Q stands for QR code. So how do we persuade the Persuadables? Well, first, the immediate path is through video. You cannot deny that. In fact, I suspect some of the Persuadables are already watching some video podcasts, and they may not be aware of it. They may not actually think of them as podcasts. And to me, that means that our newest stars, some of the biggest new video podcasters, they need to be loud and proud about this medium and its benefits. They need to talk about podcasting. We need the stars that are podcasting today and gaining benefit from this medium to give back to this medium and to talk about the fact that this is a podcast, this is what a podcast does, and you can take us anywhere. Even if you don't sit in front of the computer screen and watch us, you can still take us to work. You can still take us with you when you're running errands. We need the stars of podcasting to come out because the path in may be through video, but that is not the only way. A part of the appeal, I think, that we could make to the Persuadables might be for companion shows to popular video content. Again, they're watching more video. They're watching more streaming shows. And even podcasts about favorite brands. And all of those things grew significantly over last year. So again, I think that's a path in for the Persuadables. Really, the most appealing benefit for this segment of non-listeners, of current non-listeners, is the utilitarian benefits of podcasting. It's media you can take with you. It's media that can accompany you as you do other things. And I think while a lot of the early consumers of podcasting, the early listeners of podcasts, and I count myself in this, were attracted to the unique content, the niche content, the technology. Tomorrow's listeners, the next 20 million, which these Persuadables represent, they have more pragmatic needs, I think, convenience and companionship. We've noticed that the Persuadables are spending less time with X. They're spending less time with AM/FM radio content. But there are some signs, there's some hints. It smells this way to me, that video has not completely filled the gap that was left by those platforms. There's renewed interest in news, information, discussions about hobbies, interests. These people might even be a little bored. Maybe that's why they're TikToking so much. So I think messaging to the Persuadables really needs to hammer home that we can make your time, your downtime, your passive time, your errand time more interesting. We could we could give you more interesting use of that time through podcasts. And finally, don't forget about Facebook. That's a giant number, right? It's where these people are. And even more so today with the decline of X. There's certainly a flight to comfort, a flight to safety, a flight to your friends who are still on Facebook. Now, Facebook may not be a place to dump your podcast. We've been there, done that, didn't quite work. But it's certainly a place to communicate with this potential segment of non-listeners. It's where they are. And maybe the answer isn't just to shove your podcast in front of them, but I think it's certainly a place to engage with them, to engage with content they may be interested in. It's a place for the podcaster in some ways, just like YouTube is, if we want to grow this segment, this highly persuadable segment of, again, predominantly women, 55 plus, who are hanging out on Facebook. And that may be one of the best places that we can reach them and engage with them. So I want to thank you for your time and attention. I want to thank Wondery, BetterHelp, NPR, ESPN Podcasts, Libsyn, American Public Media, Paramount, and the SiriusXM Podcast Network. And of course, our research partners at Signal Hill, who fielded this study for us. And thank you for your time and attention. On behalf of all of us at Sounds Profitable, Brian, Kristen, Gavin, and Newt, thank you, and we'll see you next time.